Is this interesting at all?
I don't know.
I'm
Maybe
bored.
not. What are we talking about tonight then?
I don't know. Is there anything to talk about with this Sumly thing?
I don't know. I thought your post about David was really interesting. And this is obviously Mutual Admiration Society, but I thought it was very prescient and impressive that he was smart enough not to reveal his age and then made an oops. And like you said, suddenly every article about Tumblr became about his age rather than the fact that Tumblr was really well done.
Right.
And that's too bad. But I've never used Sumly, so I don't know if it's any good. Apparently you say it's not good.
I don't know what they did in the last 6 to 9 months. They have their whole app that was this whole news browsing thing. That all came about fairly recently. Before all that is when I tried it. So I didn't try any of the new stuff, so I can't really speak to what it was. But the originally the whole summarization engine I was really not impressed by. I think it was a reasonable idea to try to do something like that, but it wasn't that compelling. Like something like that where, okay, so the idea of this thing is to take any web article, news article, whatever the case, and summarize it into like 3 little 1-sentence bullet points. And so the idea is that you don't have to read everything. Well, first of all, as somebody who likes reading things, that's that's kind of missing the point. But okay, there's some uses for that. I can see that. The problem is that the summaries were so bad. Occasionally it would get maybe 1.5 of the 3 bullet points would make sense, but that was like the best I ever saw it do. So it was a way to poorly summarize news stories sometimes. And so to me, I just don't have anywhere where that fits into my life. And
you guys probably don't remember this because you didn't start using Macs until recently, but back in the classic Mac OS days, Apple made a big stink at one point in its sad decline in the 90s about system-wide text summarization service, where you could select text and ask it to summarize it, and it would summarize it down to a couple sentences. This is sounding familiar yet?
Yeah, exactly.
This was classic macOS. And that feature, it might still be in there. You should go look in like Automator and see if there's a summarized text thing. But it predates macOS 10, my recollection. And yeah, that feature did not set the world on fire.
And I don't know what the state of the art is with natural language processing doing summarization. I'm sure there's probably good stuff out there, but the thing with lots of natural language processing or AI type algorithms is that a lot of times the best they can ever do is like an 80% job. And so there's a lot of cases in the world where that's useful, but usually when you're like directly between the data and the human, and you're trying to do like just this one smart thing that involves language and concepts and very subjective, difficult, complicated things, it's not usually a good idea to expose the AI's output directly to people, because usually it's like, let's say it's 95% good. 5% is still pretty often. You're still going to hit that a lot, So, like John, you've talked a lot about speech recognition software because you used it a lot, and dictation software. What do you think is like the most or the highest acceptable error rate that you would still use it?
For summarization or for speech recognition?
For speech recognition.
Well, speech recognition, I mean, the error rate is pretty high, and I think I'd be willing to put up with a much higher error rate than I currently get. In fact, I think I'd be willing to trade correctness for responsiveness, because when you're trying to speak, you don't want to be waiting. Like the built-in dictation in OS 10 is the worst case, because you activate the little thing, and then you see the little blinky cursor in front of you, then you talk, then you have to like activate the thing again to say, okay, take what I just said and do something with it, and then you stare at the blinky thing, and then a whole bunch of text comes on the screen, and that's when you find out whether it has been totally off the rails. Whereas if it had exactly the same error rate but did it a word at a time, kind of like the difference between Siri and the Google, iOS talk speech searching thing. Mm-hmm. Responsiveness, I think, is more important than correctness in this. Obviously, if it was, 70% error rate, you'd be annoyed. But I think being responsive is more important than being exactly correct, because the Dragon has really, really good accuracy, really high accuracy, but it still frustrates me sometimes when I'm talking faster than the text is appearing and I have to stop. Maybe I don't have to stop, but I do stop to wait to see the last, 15 words come splatting out on the screen, usually all at once, to see that it's on the same page. Because if you don't do that, if you just close your eyes and talk, it will do an amazingly good job. But every once in a while, it'll get something off, and I'll go back and I'll read what I, quote unquote, wrote by speaking, and I'll have no idea what the hell I was saying. And I'll have to I'll look at it and try to think of homonyms, which word that sounds like the words on the page. Because when you make your own typos, it's I was typing the right word and I screwed up a couple of characters. You could figure out what it was you said. But when you do speechos where it transcribes the wrong thing, it could be so far off semantically. And I've literally had times where I say, I have no idea what the heck I was trying to say here, because the sentence actually makes no sense whatsoever. Even though all the words are spelled correctly and they're English words, they don't make any sense. And I don't remember what I was saying. And I got to say the word as written out loud and close my eyes and think of what it sounds like. But I mean, I don't think many people would choose to use speech recognition. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't be using it if I didn't have RSI things with typing, right? I think that's when you'll know speech recognition has really arrived, when people who can already type very quickly choose to use speech recognition instead, because it's either equally as fast or, it's so accurate that why would you bother flicking your fingers around, But we're far from that right now.
Well, plus it's not a group activity. What I mean by that is, if you're working in an office full of cubicles, like John, I presume you do, and I certainly do, if all of us are talking to our computers, that's going to be a bit loud, to say the least. And furthermore, doing the sorts of things that all three of us do, which is write code, which is a far cry from regular prose, I've never imagined nor tried to do speech recognition for writing code. But John, I can't imagine you're writing Perl and regular expressions, which is basically the same thing, using speech recognition.
It is not the same thing, and no, I am not using speech recognition for that.
Yeah.
That was a good troll.
I do my best.
No, I feel like, there's places for this stuff. A lot of people have said that, first of all, there are opportunities for anything that could be considered an assistive technology. For people, dictation is great for people who can't type, and RSI is, a usually mild but still a handicap. And so if you can't or would rather not use your hands to type, then it's great to have alternatives. But the place for a lot of this stuff is in other contexts, people who don't permanently have a specific disability, but who might temporarily have one. For example, when you're driving, you really shouldn't be typing. And when driving, you're also theoretically, hopefully, partially blind to your computing device. So that's why things like voice commands and audio cues can be so useful in a mobile app that you're expected to use while you're in the car. And so Siri is great for that, but Siri is not good enough for me to dictate everything that way. As John said, when you have alternatives, you'll take them, but it's still good to have this thing when you don't have alternatives or when your alternatives are worse.
I'm trying to look up the text summarization service from classic macOS in Google, and I can't find it. All I can find are the references to it existing in macOS 10. So maybe I'm misremembering, but I could have sworn that this was from macOS 8 or whatever. But anyway, if you want to just fire up text edit now in macOS 10, paste a bunch of text in there from an article, select the text, go to the services menu, summarize will be in there if you didn't deactivate it in your pref pane, and you get a little slider that lets you, crank it down to, one sentence if you want. So, I don't understand how. I don't know anything about this Sumly thing except for what I've read on Marco's blog and one or two other news stories. And summarization is not the whole thing. I think it was it was basically a way to let you consume news without you having to look through all the news. It would try to give you a condensed version, but not, am I getting this right? But not having a human do it, having the computer do it. And the summarization would be a part of that. But if it's the summarization part that they were excited about, again, this feature has obviously existed for a long time, whether it's in classic macOS or not. No one cares that it's there. Is it patent encumbered? Is it I still don't understand what they paid $30 million for at all. I don't understand it at all.
That's what a lot of the debate has been about. Is first of all, it's cool to say Yahoo is being stupid because Yahoo's had some pretty bad decades. So everyone's like, oh, look at how stupid Yahoo's being.
Again,
but I don't think it's them being stupid. Usually if you think a company is being stupid, usually you aren't looking at the whole picture, or there's something that you're missing, or there's some better reason for what they're doing that's better explained than they're idiots. So I think you can, unless the company is RIM, now called BlackBerry. Anyway, they actually are idiots. But for the most part, everybody else, when the explanation is, oh, they're being stupid, there's usually more to it. So I think in this case, a lot of people have suggested. So here's the deal: they bought Sumly, the product and part of the staff, for $30 million, most of which was cash. I think they said 10% was stock, but all the numbers are actually like rumored or from inside sources that are unnamed. The numbers were not officially made public, but everyone's saying $30 million, mostly in cash. And so, and it's a classic textbook acqui-hire. The product is immediately shut down, and Yahoo paid for this size startup that's a relatively modest sum for three people, for the three most important people by their definition, to work for Yahoo for a minimum of 18 months. So basically they've paid like $10 million ahead for these key people. And
that sounds even more crazy. Now that you're telling me more about this, I'm thinking it sounds even crazier than I thought. So they're shutting down the stupid product that summarizes stuff?
Oh, it's gone. They pulled it from the App Store already.
I don't understand it at all. Like, there's no way those three people are worth $30 million. There's just no way.
Right.
Like,
and
I don't care.
There's part of the debate that some people are saying that the technology was actually licensed from SRI, the parent company of Siri, before Apple bought it. That the speech recognition, or the natural language processing technology was actually SRI's, and it was licensed from them. That Sumly didn't develop that, but then the Sumly people are denying that, so it's unclear what is the truth there. But at least what Yahoo bought, at least what we know that they bought, was they paid $30 million for these three people. One of whom is the 17-year-old kid, Nick. Oh God, I should not try to pronounce his last name.
Starts with a D.
D'Aloisio, maybe? Yeah. D'Aloisio? I'm sorry, Nick. I'm probably butchering that. Nick D. But not Nick Denton. Yeah. God, this is tough. Anyway, Nick D'Aloisio, sorry. He started this company when he was 15. Now he's 17, so now he's a 17-year-old tech whiz kid millionaire, which of course the press loves to bang on that angle so much, and I kind of ripped them apart yesterday for that, as we were saying at the top of the show about how that was originally a problem at Tumblr because David was so young, but so all the stories are about how young this kid is, or about the tech press freaking out that why the heck did they buy this and why the heck did they pay so much, but. To bring this back a little bit, we had a couple weeks ago, we had a question from Abi Beckert. He suggested an interesting topic. He said, what if Apple bought Yahoo? And the idea there was like Apple needs to buy, or Apple needs good server-side and services talent. And Yahoo might have that. And I thought about this topic for a little bit. Yahoo is still very popular especially among non-geek demographics. Like normal people, as we like to say in the geek world, which is probably condescending or somehow weird, but sorry about that. Anyway, I don't know what the right term is. Non-geeks, I think, is fair. But I think Yahoo is, for the most part, resting on their previously achieved laurels, and I don't think they've really done a lot in the last decade, maybe, to really get new users and to really grow the company. And that's why everyone has said they've been in trouble, and that's why it was interesting when they brought on Marissa Mayer as CEO from Google, so that was interesting. But either way, this is a company that needs to make a comeback of some sort. They've also, in the last decade, gone through a lot of layoffs. A lot of very talented people have left or gotten fired or gotten laid off. So I don't have any inside sources at Yahoo, but I have to imagine they probably have a talent shortage. And because if you're really good, you probably were not happy working at Yahoo in the last decade, and you probably left or didn't go there in the first place. because they've just lost so many good people over the last few years. So, and they have some good properties like Flickr that we've just seen languish and stagnate as all the good people have left, or they've gotten fired. So Yahoo, talent-wise, I have to imagine, is not in good shape. So the other angle people are discussing with the Sumley deal is, first of all, Nick D'Aloisio, again, I'm sorry, he might be a really good product sensibility person. And that's it's the kind of person that in one way Steve Jobs was. It's the kind of person certainly that David Karp is at Tumblr. Believe me, he is definitely that kind of person. And that's a very valuable kind of person to, just shorthand, just called product people. Product people can make or break a company because they make the decisions about what a product should be, and they have the sensibilities to know what people will like and what will work. So if Nick D'Aloisio is a really good product person, then it would be valuable to bring him onto Yahoo, because Yahoo needs people like that.
Not $30 million valuable. I was trying to think of some sane reason that you'd pay $30 million, and here's what I've come up with, and it's not great, and it's based on no information. One, there's a bidding war. You're not the only one who wants to buy these people. You pay what the market demands. If you want them more than someone else, you just go up, 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 and we get them in. And two is intellectual property. They have some stuff that it would cost you. It's more important for you to own this intellectual property because it would cost you more to let someone else scoop it up, and then you have to license it from them long term. Those are the only two things I can think of.
Well, what I'm thinking is there are two factors here that could have driven the price up a little bit artificially. One is that Yahoo is, again, not in good shape. And, you could argue that having a really good product person is very valuable to the company. You could counter-argue that, well, he's only obligated to stay there for 18 months. So, they might...
Like it doesn't matter how good you are. 18 months, one thing. And the second thing is unproven. So show me you're a great product person.
Right.
Where's your great product? Was it this thing that we just canned and no one was really interested in? Because that ain't great. I mean, even Steve Jobs didn't get $30 million the day he arrived at Apple in 1997. He had to kind of sort of, A, kick out the old CEO, and B, kind of sort of prove himself before, like, they were like, okay, well, he didn't come out the gate and say, oh, Steve Jobs, you're wonderful. We're going to immediately let you take over and give you tons and tons of money and shower you with praise. If Steve Jobs has to prove himself, this kid has to as well. Like, this is not, you don't pay $30 million for a couple of employees, no matter who they are, even if they literally are the best employees in the entire world. You just don't pay that much money for you wouldn't have to. You could get those employees for less money if they didn't know. Like, they obviously know they have something, or think or know they have something that's actually worth much more than they would be individually as employees,
Well, maybe Yahoo can't get them for less. Like Yahoo, again, Yahoo has a problem. Because if you're really good in this industry, do you want to work at Yahoo? Probably not. That's a problem.
I think $5 million a head for 18 months would do it.
So anyway, one thing I think they can justify the high price by saying, well, we're Yahoo, we need people, we need good people. The other thing is, Nick D'Aloisio, again, I'm sorry, is extremely relentless and really, really good at self-promotion. This guy, I linked to this Gizmodo article, which is really kind of tasteless, honestly. I felt bad even linking. I almost didn't link to it.
Wait, on Gizmodo? Really?
Yeah.
Weird.
Because this, you got to keep in mind, this is a teenager. Or at least he was. He's 18 now, I guess, or 17, whatever. But this is a teenager. Like, if I started a company when I was a teenager and got a whole bunch of publicity and got all over the press and was able to email people who were important in the industry, I don't know that I would have acted that much better, honestly. Because when I was a teenager, I was an idiot. And I guess I'm probably going to look back at this time in 10 years and say I was an idiot now, but I at least feel like I'm way less of an idiot now than I was when I was a teenager. So I got to give this kid the benefit of the doubt that, okay, he was 15 when he started all this stuff, and when I was 15, I was an idiot. So anyway, but he emailed this Gizmodo reporter relentlessly, like every day, making up all this stuff like, oh, my boss is going to get on my back if you don't put my app in the Hall of Fame or something like that. And everything was marked urgent. So I didn't see that story when it came out, but Nick gave me a similar email barrage about 6 months later, trying to get me to integrate Sumly into Instapaper. And I mean, the emails he sent were, I don't want to be mean to the kid, but I mean, it was ridiculous. He would email me like multiple times a day on some of these days. Everything was marked like super urgent, even though it wasn't urgent, which is just kind of a rude thing to do. And he would impose this artificial sense of urgency, and everything had to be done quickly right now. Oh my God. A lot like a high pressure car salesman, like really like high pressure manipulation, I would say. And really, I was not left with a very good impression of Nick from these emails, just because I felt like I was being manipulated and badgered and annoyed. So this, and clearly, because he did the exact same thing to somebody else, I have to imagine this is just part of his personality, where he can badger the crap out of people until they do what he wants. And so if you look at his company has some fairly prominent investors. He had a promotional video done with Stephen Fry, among other people he did a few things with too, and like he has a lot of connections, obviously, and I don't know if he badgered his way in or if he earned them or what. This kid is really, really good at getting people on his side and badgering people into paying attention to him and doing what he wants for his product. So it's very possible that just Yahoo's desperation and that could have been the only two factors that made this price go way higher than we think it probably should have.
That seems highly unlikely to me.
You didn't get these kids' emails.
I read the articles. He's like, yes, he's enthusiastic and annoying, but like there's obviously something there that we don't know, have information about. There's something. It's a bidding war. It's intellectual property. It's obviously not the product, because they canned that. So you can't. It's not that. Did the product have a big user base that they're transferring? No, I don't think that's it either. It's got to be something else.
The product had less than 1 million downloads and no revenue.
I mean, because think about it. Like, if you're running a company, you can't hire a superstar person for $10 million a head. All your existing people who are like, wait, aren't I a superstar? Why don't I get $10 million for a team? It doesn't. You just can't do that. There's got to be something there worth money to the company. Besides those human beings.
I think it's clear. I think you're right that we don't know the whole story here, because obviously this still seems ridiculous, but I don't think there needs to be that much more to it for it to be understandable or plausible. Like, I don't think they had some kind of awesome, super duper natural language processing technology that Yahoo now owns. I don't think that's it at all, because I saw the technology and it wasn't that compelling.
Well, it might just be patents. Like I said, intellectual property doesn't have to actually be awesome. It can be super duper dumb. In fact, those are the best kind of patents, the super dumb patents.
I don't think they were in business long enough to get a patent issued.
Oh,
the company was only 18 months old.
Everybody's got a patent. Everyone's got a patent.
Well, and I read somewhere today, and I wish I remember where I read this, so this is probably false since I barely remember where I read it, but somebody said that it wasn't even their tech, that it was like quasi-Siri, in that they licensed the tech from someone else and just put a UI in front of it and called it theirs. So I agree with you, John, that if it's not the people, then it should be IP, but supposedly the IP isn't theirs anyway, so what gives? I don't know.
Again, I think John's right. There has to be something else here that has not been reported.
Well, and if it's the desperation of Yahoo, something that I've heard or I've read a lot about lately is how desperate Apple is. So how far is Apple from being in this position? And I know that's kind of a ridiculous and absurd thing to ask, but it's also kind of a legitimate thing to ask. I mean, is Apple really where the super incredible mega nerds want to be these days?
That's a very good question. I've heard a lot of things, rumors and some things from people in Apple, that they have a lot of problems retaining good talent. Getting good talent, maybe getting good talent they still are okay with, but retaining good talent, they're having a big problem there.
It makes sense that they have trouble retaining, because like the way Apple works is if you are a really smart, great performer, lots of talent, can do lots of different things, you're not going to go to Apple and get to do what you want to do, because the company does so few things. Like, it's focused, right? So you can help contribute to what may be a big deal, but you're not going to go, I have this really great idea for this thing, and Apple's going to be like, no, it's like they shoot down everyone's idea. Like, only very, very few ideas actually get implemented. So eventually, after you've worked on one or two things that that Apple decided to do and you were important in contributing to them or whatever, you will inevitably say, well, you know what, but now I want to actually do the thing that I was thinking of that I think is cool. And there's no way for you to do that inside of Apple. So you inevitably have to leave. And it's not like the fault of Apple for doing this because they have to be focused as a company. But if you get really smart and multi-talented people, you can't keep them in this confined place where they can only contribute to the one or two or three things that are important for Apple to do. They will want to go off on their own, even if it's just like, I just want to go off and make letterpress or something. Apple's not interested in that, but maybe you are, and you can't do that within Apple. And so you're like, all right, well, I worked on this, I worked on that. They were great. It's really important work. Lots of people use it, but I just want to do my thing. So I think that's inevitable.
I think also, you can kind of get some idea that, most of the people I know, and maybe this is just the people I've observed because it's who I follow on Twitter or whatever, but most of the people I know who have left Apple have gone to much smaller companies. Oftentimes, they've gone to start a startup, and I think it's part of what you said, John. It's part of them wanting to do something on a much smaller scale where they can have a bigger role, or make a product that Apple would never make. But I think part of it also is that Apple has created this entire environment, this entire ecosystem of small startups being able to succeed and one-person shops being able to succeed on the App Store. And their people being in charge of this stuff or working on the frameworks or working in this world or at least being surrounded by other developers who are working in this world, that has to be very tempting for people who work inside of Apple to be looking at all these other people making probably way more money than they make at their job at Apple, and doing really cool things and making products from scratch and having no boss. To watch that from the inside and not be able to participate, that has to be very tempting, and I bet that pulls a lot of people out of Apple.
But isn't the converse also true in the sense that, let's say I was a middle-of-the-road, self-employed iOS developer, and I have a few apps or maybe just one app in the App Store that's popular but not it's barely self-sustaining. And then Apple says to me, hey, why don't you interview with us? I can't imagine I would be like, no, I really like being my own person. And it's hard for me to fathom what it's like to be self-employed because I've worked for the man my entire life. But I guess what I'm saying is if I was not a superstar, and if I was just a regular Joe who was trying to do his own thing in the App Store, and Apple said, hey, we've seen what you do and we really like it and we'd like you to interview, I got to imagine I'd be thrilled at that opportunity. I would be so beside myself.
They want
excited.
you to move to California, though. How do you feel about it now?
Well, and that's a very, very fair point.
Because they don't do the telecommuting thing really, and that's another limiting factor. You want to work for Apple, you got to live in Apple Land, and living in Apple Land is expensive, and maybe that's not where your family is, and maybe that's not where you want to live.
And if you do live out there, you have a lot of competition for that job, or rather, people have a lot of competition for an employer. Like if you live out there already, then you can go work for any number of big tech companies plus an infinite number of small ones.
And that's a really good point. It really honestly is. And I'm hypothesizing. I don't know what any of this is like. But I guess what I'm saying is, as much as Apple is arguably bleeding talent, I can't imagine that it's that hard for them to find new talent. That being said, a revolving door is clearly not a sustainable approach. So I don't know. It's an odd thing to think about.
Yeah, I think it's not just the people who like go there, are a superstar, do something awesome, like design the UI for the original iOS or the iPhone OS as it was then known, launch the original iPhone, maybe do one or two other projects, and say, all right, well now I feel like I have all the talents under my belt to do basically whatever I want, and I want to be the one in charge because you can only have so many chiefs. It's mostly got to be Indians, especially at a company like Apple. You only do a limited number of things. Only a limited number of people are in charge.
Do you mean, is this an H-1B reference? Or
Native Americans, Marco?
I don't know if we're allowed to call them that.
Yeah.
Suddenly
anyway,
we've taken a turn.
So like, there's that feeling that you want to, like, I want to be the guy who calls the shots, right? And so those people go off and do that. But it's not just the people who are like, well, I came in at the bottom, I learned some stuff, and now I'm able to go off on my own. Because, like, like you said, you can make more money. My friends are making these hit applications and making tons more money than I am. I could be proprietor of my own business. I could have, unlimited income, limited only by my success, not by like a review process and like cost of living raises and bonuses and like maybe stock options are unlucky. Think about Bertrand Serlet, who was one of the guys in charge, making presumably tons of money. He didn't leave Apple because he didn't get to be in charge of stuff. Well, I mean, he wasn't Steve Jobs, but he was like, 2 or 3 rungs down from there. If anyone's, there's very few people who have that level of power. And he certainly wasn't, oh, well, I'm so bitter that these people are making money in the App Store. He just wanted to go and do something different. And no matter where you are, except maybe if you're at the very, very top of that pyramid, if you have an itch to go do something, you can't do it within Apple if it's not something that Apple wants to do. And so he left to do whatever his secret startup is right now. He didn't retire to sit on the beach and, count his money and watch the waves come in. He had an intellectual itch and he wanted to do something. And so he left to do it. And that's inevitably going to happen in a company where you hire people because that's what you want in your company. People who could be the Steve Jobs of their own company, but you want them to work for you, and you want to kind of like get them as long as you possibly can, and get what you can out of them. But I don't think Apple is bitter that they go off and do things on their own. If anything, it's like if we have an employee who couldn't leave Apple and go off and do better for themselves, maybe we didn't make the right hire. Like that's the calculus there. They want all people who could do better outside of Apple, but they want to keep them for as long as they can, and get the best work out of them, I guess.
I think it's interesting maybe to distinguish, we're talking about how Apple's having trouble getting talent, but that seems to be mostly at the lower levels of the company and the mid levels of the company. At the upper levels of the company, they seem to have, for the most part, pretty strong loyalty and pretty long-running people there. And so maybe
executives, can a middle manager go off and do their own thing and be as successful as they are as Apple? No, because at a certain point when you get high enough, Bertrand is an exception because he was in the engineering organization, but there are people who are just managers. And if you're a long-time manager at Apple, you're going to be making lots of money. Maybe you don't care that you don't get to tell the company what the company gets to do. Like, there's room for middle management everywhere. Those people aren't going to leave voluntarily.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But I mean, if you look at other companies, I think Apple is pretty good at retaining the upper people. And so I guess the question is the upper people, obviously, frequent changes there would probably be way more disruptive to the company than frequent changes at the lower levels of the company. Are frequent changes at the lower levels really something that they should be worried about, or should they just keep trying to make the best stuff and keep retaining the upper people and just kind of hope that the lower people keep coming in faster than they're going out?
I think they probably need to figure out some way to prolong the really smart people's stay by giving them some way to flex their independence and desire to do something. It's totally against Apple's MO to do, the computer equivalent of concept cars or have something like Google Labs or 20% time. Those are just not in Apple's culture. Mm-hmm. But Apple's culture is so far in the other direction. If you can just give people some outlet within that structure to say, there is a slim chance, however slim, it's like the lottery, however slim, that you may be able to get us to do your crazy idea. Like think of the original Xbox, right? So I think it was Jay Allard and maybe one other person had the idea, Microsoft should do a gaming console. And they were not vice presidents when they came up with this idea. They were, pretty much rank and file employees who'd been there for a while, but were not in a position to say, Microsoft should make a game console. But they were able to take that idea and pitch it up the ladder and eventually convince Microsoft to make a game console, and they became a big part of that process. Not like say, oh, good, that's a great idea, guys, now go back and toil. No, they became, bigwigs in charge of that project. That can happen inside Microsoft, or at least happened once. There are plenty of people in lower positions in Apple whose ideas come to fruition and become a big type of thing, but I'm not sure they go with those ideas up the ladder. So if you could just make some sort of forum within the company for these independent people to come up with something that it's possible to pitch its way up and to become the next big, pillar on the stool, even if that only happens once every 10 years or something. I mean, I don't know, none of us have ever worked for Apple, so we're all just speculating on the outside what it might be like. But I think that type of like 20% time, however BS it is at Google these days, and Google Labs type things in the pre-Google Plus days, let's say, before Google tried to become maniacally focused, that was a lot of the reason I think a lot of really smart people stayed at Google. Because whether it actually anything actually came to fruition or not, there was the idea that it was a bunch of smart people doing lots of interesting things in all sorts of directions, and why would you leave to go anyplace else? Because here they give you a nice salary, they feed you, they take care of you, you have health insurance, it's a nice job, and you kind of sort of get to do whatever you want. And who knows, that thing, whatever you want, could become the next Gmail, because that's where Gmail came from, right? Or the next Google Reader before, And so like that environment within Google, the pre-Google Plus Google, I think that served as a magnet to pull people into Google and to keep people into Google. Maybe the wrong kind of people, and maybe not the kind of people Apple wants, but Apple needs just a tiny little taste of that, a little bit more than they have now, and I think that would help them keep people for, like, say, 6 months longer.
Yeah, hopefully longer than that. But yeah, I think that's wise. I don't know. Casey, what do you think?
I think I agree with everything you said. What's hard for me to reconcile is if you look at the big players in California, and let me hedge heavily by saying I'm an East Coast guy. I've only been to California a handful of times in my life. In fact, at least half of them were for WWDC. I don't understand what the culture and what the technology sector looks like out there. So I apologize for getting all the following wrong. Email Marco. But if you're a really bright engineer and you're really passionate about writing code, where are your options? I mean, you can go to Microsoft, but most people would perceive that as just corporate stooge land. You can go to Google, which means your entire purpose in life is to sell ads. You can go to Yahoo, which means you're the only bright star in a cloudy sky, which some people might like, but is not my cup of tea. Or you can go to Apple, and at least Apple is devoted to pleasing customers as opposed to telling customers they're out to please them and actually putting their eyeballs for advertisements. Does that make sense? Like, I don't see why anyone else would be compelling, with the exception, as you guys mentioned, of startups. But I don't know. I guess I'm so risk adverse that doesn't seem that compelling to me either.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I think that senior executives stay as well, is because especially if you're a senior executive, like it's the, you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life or come with me and change the world. Like those executives really feel like they can have the biggest impact on the world by being a regular good old middle manager in Apple than being a regular good old middle manager at Coca-Cola or GM or Procter & Gamble, because they don't feel like they're, like they can go to parties. So I work for Apple. Yes, I'm a very important person. The iPod, you've heard of that? Yeah, that's the company that I work. You know what I mean? Like that there's all sorts of angles to that, but it really is a chance. And same thing for engineers, to do something that you think will have an impact. That used to be Microsoft. That was certainly Google, and probably still is Google, because you could say you work for Google, and that, like, I don't know what we call it, job satisfaction, or feeling like your job is important and can change the world, and you're not just toiling away. And I think Apple is just as much a corporate stooge job as Microsoft or any other place. I mean, it's a big corporation. It's like it is what it is. It's not crazily different than any other large corporation, like say Valve or something, where it's totally outside the realm of expectations. They have managers and employees and teams, and there may be a couple of things that are different about them, and certainly at the top levels, the company behaves very differently in terms of focus and everything. But to employees, I don't know. I don't think it's that different.
Maybe it's naive of me, but I feel like Microsoft's purpose in life, maybe up until recently, but Microsoft's purpose in life was to please other companies. And Yahoo's purpose in life is to buy cool things and ruin them. And Google's purpose Google
buys cool things and ruins them too.
That's true. And Google's purpose in life is to sell advertisements. And at least Apple's building cool stuff, right? I mean, if you're going to choose a corporate stooge job, and I think, John, you're right, Apple's more corporate stoogey than I care to admit. But if you're going to choose a corporate stooge job on the left coast, is Apple not the best option?
Well, I mean, it also depends on what kind of person you are. Like, here's the problem we were talking about, with Apple and its services, right? So say you are someone who does something on the server side, data centers, infrastructure type software, you don't want to go work for Apple because Apple has not shown that it values those people or that part of its business. It just wants it to work, doesn't want to hear about it. And like the smartest, best server side people are not going to go work. They don't want to work at Apple because they want to be valued. If they go work at Google, they're practically gods. You get to work on GFS version 3 or Spanner or whatever these infrastructure things. Like those are like serious business. Like that's the whole company, right? But at Apple, you're just like, we don't want to hear you or know who you are or anything about you. And all we ever hear is that you're screwing up, and just make it like the people who get the glory are, I made the iPhone interface, or I'm designing the next piece of hardware, I work on the operating system. Nobody is getting any glory or any fame or any recognition or putting anything in open source or contributing to anything who's working on server side at Apple. Forget it. So Apple, I think, cannot hire those people. We're talking about like, if you're a client side programmer or if you're a designer, yeah. Designers want to go to Apple. Client-side native app people want to go to Apple. But if you're a web developer or server-side person, you don't want to go to Apple probably.
That's not entirely true. I think that's mostly true. But if you happen to be one of the 6 people on the planet that knows how to do web objects, I think you can.
Yeah, it's like COBOL. Yeah, they're gathering up the COBOL programmers.
No, you're right. You're right. But I think that the 6 people that do web objects in the world, and an acquaintance of a friend of a friend of a friend does web objects and actually lives nearby to where I live, and he works for Apple because, or at least that's my understanding. I could be totally wrong, but my point is, if you do one of the things that Apple does that nobody else does, like web objects, you can pave your own way.
Right, but I'm saying like that's why Apple's having trouble hiring the people they need to make their server-side stuff better, because hiring a bunch of web objects programmers is not going to help them make their stuff better, right? They want the people who are taking the jobs elsewhere who are going to come up with the next big thing, or at least just bring Apple up to date with like 10 years ago tech. Or they're so far behind and so out in the weeds on this. They just want to get good server-side people to do their stuff, and it's and I bet like it's not just that maybe they can get the good server-side people. Once the good server-side people get there and they go like, the first thing they want to do is like, we got to get rid of this web objects crap. What the hell are you guys doing? And they'll find out like that the culture is like, no, we can't get rid of the web objects. It runs the iTunes store that sells 20 hojillion songs every 3 seconds, and you can't break it, and you're not going to rewrite it in something else. Just help us get better, but don't change anything. Like that type of attitude, that is totally. Talk about corporate stooge jobs. Like that's the way it is. Because there are realities that have to be dealt with. You can't come in and say, no. Like the Apple Store, that should not be written that way. You just got to get rid of it and replace it with something else. That's not a big, what's the payoff? So we're going to risk destroying our entire, multi-billion transaction business from what's the benefit at the end? Oh, that we aren't on web objects. Oh, well, you have to see it'll give you a path forward, and you'll be able to build. Like it's so hard to sell those type of projects, right? And so I think those people go there and then like realize that they're not going to be able to change anything, and then leave and get a job at Facebook.
And that's true until you have somebody like The Verge writing an article about how crummy iCloud is.
That's not the server-side guy's fault.
Is it not?
No.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Before that, let me give our sponsor break here. This episode is once again sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace is just an awesome way to make a website and have it hosted and designed and managed for you. It is fantastic. It's a website hosting platform. You can put up your blog, you can put up a store, a portfolio, a site for your business, a site for your music, whatever you want to do. You can put it up on Squarespace. Plans start at just $10 a month, and really, it could not be easier. They have a whole bunch of great templates designed by professional designers. And if you want to jump in and customize all the CSS and HTML and JavaScript, you can do all that. Our site is hosted there, atp.fm. You can check it out. That's totally a Squarespace site with minimal hacking involved. And if you don't want to mess with the hacking, you don't have to. You can just go there and sign up and move stuff around, drag and drop. Everything is hosted. It is just so low needs and awesome. I really can't overstate this enough. Hosting a website on Squarespace is just so ridiculously easy. It's where I tell everybody in my life who asks me, how do I make a site? Where should I host this? Could you help me with this? I say, yes, I can help you. I will tell you to go to Squarespace, and that's it. Go there, that's it. And it's like telling people who want tech support, it's like telling them to just get a Mac. Because you can give them that directive, and they won't come back to you calling you every 5 minutes with some problem and making you fix their computer. Squarespace is that for web hosting and website construction. Trust me, it is awesome. Go check out Squarespace. You can use our coupon code ATP3 for Accidental Tech Podcast in the month of 3. That's code ATP3. Use that code at checkout to save 10%. And again, plans are at $10 a month. You can even sell stuff. You can do commerce. I can't even fit everything they do into one ad break. Believe me, Squarespace is great. You can host any kind of website you want, a beautiful site, and you don't have to worry about hosting. You don't have to worry about designing everything from scratch. It's all done for you. It's fantastic. Go to squarespace.com, check it out today. And thanks to Squarespace for supporting us once again. So there's this article on The Verge called "Why Doesn't iCloud Just Work?" And it's getting a lot of attention. And I think this is worth a little bit of discussion here. And there was a great follow-up from Brent Simmons that we'll get to in a little bit. But, I mean, what do you think about this article? Like, it basically cites a lot of users and developers basically all saying, like, we tried to build iCloud sync into our apps, and it just didn't work, and we had to cancel it.
The problem I had with it was very few of the developers were named, and I don't blame them because if it were me, I wouldn't want to be named. I have tremendous respect for, I think Pasco from Black Pixel was named. I think Justin Williams was named, and I have tremendous respect for those who were named. But I don't think the message was unfair or invalid. Everything I've ever heard from both prominent people whom I follow on Twitter, for example, and even friends whom do this locally, all of them have
you
said,
boom too much.
Yeah, I know. You saw that feedback, didn't you? Anyway, the people who I know that do this locally, everyone has universally said it's crap. It's in the same way that auto layout is either crap or so impossibly difficult to get right that it's effectively crap. It's all crap, I tell you.
No, this is much worse than auto layout.
It is. It really is. But, I mean, so at what point is this wheel squeaky enough for Apple to really fix it? And can they fix it? I know, John, you've talked at length about how you're skeptical whether they can.
Well, but this is separate issues. That's why I said that the iCloud core data thing, and that's specifically what we're talking about here, is it's not so much the server-side people's sword. The server-side people have the answer for, the server-side stuff being flaky or whatever. But as far as I can tell from listening to all the same developers and talking to some of them in person and reading all different articles in their blogs, it's a design problem. It's a high level box level design and also an API design problem. Like the high level design is like, is there a way to have 17 different devices with just with a bunch of related objects stored in local databases and get them all to sync together without doing like what Google does, which is like, okay, well, Google has your mail, your email is on their servers, and that is the one source of truth in the entire world. And when you pull it up in your web browser, you're not like synchronizing the state on your web browser, but that thing is just like, oh, well, there's one central source of truth everywhere, and everyone synchronizes with that, and all their actions like modified. This is a bunch of local things that do modifications, then they all try to synchronize with each other later, sort of in a peer-to-peer type fashion. And I'm not sure that conceptually and algorithmically they've worked out how that's supposed to work for arbitrary object models. Because with core data, you can make up your own object model and make your own relations between things, and it's not a fixed schema type. I mean, it's not schemaless, but it's not like they don't know how your application works. So they're trying to make a general purpose system for any sort of tree of objects that you can modify in any sort of way, and that later go to another thing that has its own tree of objects that's in a different state, modify that one, and then have the two reconcile themselves with each other and have that actually work. Like sometimes you don't even know what's supposed to happen. So that's the first problem. The second problem is it looks like the API design that's on top of this conceptual thing doesn't give the developers nice ways to do the things they want because the problems are so complicated. Like one of the ones they put in the article is like, what if someone, takes my app, starts doing stuff with it, builds, essentially builds an object model for their data, and then they sign into iCloud. And their iCloud account, they had previously installed this application elsewhere, and they had a bunch of object data from there. How do I reconcile, do I erase everything that they have and replace it with what's their iCloud version of this thing? Do I try to merge the two? Or what if they're not related at all? It is just a nightmarish type problem, and I think conceptually, ignore bugs, ignore server availability, ignore server speed, ignore visibility of anything. I just think conceptually, they don't have something that is nailed down that will work 100% of the time. And then layer on top of that, oh, well, there are bugs and there are APIs that there's no hook for me to say, hey, tell me when this thing changes. And sometimes it gets corrupted and it gets wedged and you can't tell what's wrong because I have no API to query. Is this thing available? Is it not available? Has new data come in? Has new data not come in? Like, it's just failure on top of failure on top of failure. And it's not just one thing. So that's why I think, like, get the best server-side people in the world. It's not going to save them from this, but they still have 7 other layers of things that have gone wrong with this specifically. And I think the conceptually simpler ones, like the key value storage and document storage, because there's a solid design under there, whether it's like, well, last update wins, like in key value, I think key value's last update wins, and something a little more sophisticated for document, it's like a very simple conceptual model. Then they can put an implementation on top of that, which may or may not have a few bugs, but it's okay. And there's enough visibility into it and you can get stuff done. Like, I mean, we're all developers. You know what it's like when you start programming something and you didn't think it through conceptually to begin with. There's no amount of typing you can do after that to make it better. You have to just go, wait a second. What the hell am I doing here? This is never going to work right. I haven't even thought it through yet. I can't just start blindly typing and putting in weird cases and try to make this work. And that's the situation I think they're in with iCloud core data stuff.
Yeah, and I think from what I've heard and from what I've seen from other developers, I haven't done much with iCloud. I should say that up front. The only thing I've done with iCloud was a very basic feature of syncing your position and currently read article in the magazine, which works sometimes. And what
did you use for that? Was that key value stuff?
Yeah, I just use key value because it's just way easier. Literally, I'm just storing I'm storing article positions in each article because that's small, and I'm storing there's one key that just tells me what article you're currently reading. That's it. But the main concerns I've heard have been, what you said, the core data sync, which is I have this whole database of objects in my app. And when iCloud was unveiled, I believe Steve Jobs was doing this part of the presentation. He even said, like, and it works with the core data. You just sync it and it just works. And everyone I think that got a huge applause because
if it worked,
the whole
it would
audience,
be awesome, wouldn't it?
Exactly. The whole audience was blown away. Like, really? Because that's a really hard problem. Like, that's amazing.
He should have said, no, not really. Just kidding.
And so, we were promised that this would work. And so a lot of developers relied on that. So the core data sync, that I've always heard has been a complete disaster. But I think, and the key value store is fine and everything. Documents, I don't know a lot of developers who've used the document model because originally everybody just did either key value or core data if they could.
Well, there are things to do documents, and to be fair to to be unfair to the server side people, like back in the iOS 5 days, like almost nothing worked right. Like key value is obviously the simplest,
right? And
has the most, and document storage mostly worked, but had some kind of annoying bugs and quirks, even that can be a little bit weird. So all these things were flaky to begin with, but it's just like the reason this is coming to a head now is because, all right, these things have had time to stew. iCloud didn't come out 3 months ago, right? The iCloud is not brand spanking new. All these APIs, like, we gave them like the one major version of iOS to mature, the one major version of macOS 10 to mature. And now that like key value storage and document storage seem to be following the typical path of Apple APIs, and core data is not like getting better.
Well, I think the biggest problem, I have heard that core data is the most unreliable part of the iCloud sync stuff. But I think the much bigger problem, which you breezed past a little bit ago, is that everything is tied to the Apple ID that's currently signed in, and that people sign out of Apple IDs and into different Apple IDs on their devices fairly frequently. Not everyone's not doing it every day, but there's a good number of people who do it regularly. Because
and they have APIs for that. They have APIs for it. They're like, oh, and you're going to keep in mind that when you launch, you may not be in the same Apple ID as when your stuff was made, and you may get this callback that means they changed Apple IDs, and like they're aware that this is going to happen, but they like kind of shove it under the carpet of the program and say, oh, and you'll figure out what to do when that happens. Like, what am I supposed to do? In some cases, like all the pre-existing data gets deleted, like that was in your local directory. Like, and what if I hadn't synced that and like it's gone now? Like you don't have it's like throwing an exception if you can't, if the disk is full or something. Well, I'll catch that exception. What are you going to do about it? Delete stuff? Right. I mean, like sometimes you can't. There's no sane recovery, or there's nothing smart for you to do. That's why I talk about like the conceptually, not like oh well, we have a callback for when they changed things, and we'll automatically clean up all the old data, and you're ready to go again. I'm like, but wait a second, like from a user's perspective, like What if you want to do something different? What if you want to tell people that this is happening, that they're going to end up deleting all their local data? And like, I just don't think it's been thought through yet. I mean, and this is all like old data, like with the frustration of the Verge article was like, we talk to Apple and they don't tell us. Of course, they're not going to tell you anything. That's their MO. They just like
right.
Total silence. And like either WWDC, they're going to come out with like, the API equivalent of the apology mouse from Macworld, New York, 2000, where we're sorry for the puck. Look under your chair. Look under your chair. There's a sane database syncing. Like they'll come out. Like, it's kind of it gives me some hope because like MobileMe was a disaster and they had to change the name and you get iCloud. But they have had at least one instance where they had something that was a disaster and they came out with the much better, awesome version of it and didn't change the name, and that's FileVault. Where FileVault 1 was just a mess, and FileVault 2 kept the same name, but it was totally unrelated other than in name and that it did the same function and is awesome. So FileVault 2 is awesome, FileVault 1 was terrible. So if iCloud core data syncing, if this is considered just awful and then like something else comes out that's different and they say, here's this new thing, just forget about the old thing, they can still call it iCloud because iCloud is an umbrella term that already covers umpteen different things, and why not just keep changing out the scope? Because like, and they have the advantage of not having this user base. Like, wait, what about all the successful applications built on iCloud and core data syncing? They'll have to rewrite. Oh, there aren't any. Don't worry.
And I think you're right though. But conceptually, this is a problem. Like, the biggest problem being usually that people who sign in and out of different Apple IDs. What is the app supposed to do about that? Like, I don't think that's the kind of thing that could necessarily be fixed with a revision to the API or a new server-side backend, because it's like remember like a year ago there was that whole debate about the guy whose iPhone alarm went off in the Symphony, and it was this whole thing. Well, what should the behavior of the alarm be with overriding the sound switch? And I wrote a big thing back then about it, and my theory was, this is a hard problem because you've told the phone, wake me up at this time no matter what. And you've also told the phone, don't make noise right now. And so you've given it these conflicting directives.
That was the problem with HAL 9000 too.
So you've given it these conflicting directives, and no matter what choice you make, it's going to anger some portion of the user base that's non-trivial. And so that's kind of a problem with the user at that point. Well, with this, with iCloud syncing, you've made this system where your data is tied to whatever Apple ID is signed in all your apps. Like that's your data is just tied to that. And then, but a lot of people have different Apple IDs. Some people, like a couple, will share one Apple ID, so they don't have to pay for apps twice to be on both of their phones. Some people will have a different Apple ID for being a developer versus being a consumer. Like, there's lots of reasons why people will have different Apple IDs, and Apple does not make it easy to merge them or switch them or anything like that. So, it's a very common thing. And if your app has its own sync platform, then it has some kind of concept of being logged in to that. And so if you change your Apple ID system-wide to go use a certain app or to do a certain thing, and then you launch, my note-taking app, whatever, HD Cloud Plus, then I don't lose that sync association from your Apple ID because I'm using my own custom sync thing that you've logged into. And if you actually go into my app and want to sync with a different thing, you have to go into my app and log out explicitly of that account. And presumably that stuff is all stored server-side, and then you can log in as something else. It's a deliberate user action. Whereas if you're using iCloud syncing, users might not realize, in fact, they probably almost never do realize, that if they log out system-wide of iCloud, then the data in app XYZ is going to be blown away.
And the worst part is that that data may be blown away, and that data may never have made it to any other devices.
Right.
Like, it may never have been synchronized, so it's actually gone. And
I don't know that the app has any way to tell that.
Well, some of these things you could fix with APIs. Like, say the existing APIs were all completely bug-free, and you got these callbacks, and you were given they add new APIs, like, oh, we're about to change your Apple ID. Maybe they already have this, and you have an opportunity to save this stuff off to the side or whatever. You still end up with situations where, like, what if I do these 3 changes in this device, do these 4 changes in that device that are conflicting, these 4 changes in that device that are conflicting, and they all happen more or less simultaneously, and I turn these 2 on, then turn those 2 off, then turn the third one back on, to try to figure out what the state should I allow modifications to continue? What about when I turn those two back on? Like, reconciling these all without like a single central source of truth, like, you know, Gmail, where it's just everyone communicates up to the server and makes modifications there, allowing you to make local modifications and trying to resolve that into like a replayable transaction log that results in some sort of consistent thing. You can make something that's like provably like it will have a deterministic consistent result, but the odds that result being what the users expected it to be are probably zero, because the users will inevitably issue a series of conflicting instructions, and when the thing's synchronized, no matter what the stuff picks, sometimes it's not going to be what they wanted because they gave conflicting instructions. There is actually no right answer. So that's what I'm saying. Like, the model they're using for core data, you know, arbitrary object graph syncing is never, even if it's 100% bug free, is never going to look to users like the magical, hey, everything just works, because it's, you know, they will issue conflicting commands with their actions on their individual devices, and when those devices synchronize, even assuming zero bugs and perfect performance, they're going to be sad that they're going to end up, quote unquote, losing data.
Right.
Even if you were to say, no, let me see, you didn't actually lose data because here's how we reconcile things, and you can see these series of conflicting commands can only lead to one thing, and you can't have this and that, have that. And you're like, well, but I wanted the other thing. Actually, what I really wanted was like a merge of those two, but with me manually picking, like, it can't know that, you know? So that's never going to make people happy. And like, I'm not sure what the solution there is, except for maybe having, I mean, you can't do what Google does. You can't have every single change to your application sending commands up to a server. You know, I mean, Google has offline mode to Gmail too, but I think the reason that I work with Gmail, I think, is because they have a defined data model that is not as complicated, and, you know, it's an email application with with messages and labels and stuff. It's not arbitrarily structured, interrelated data objects in Objective-C that you get to write yourself, you know?
Right. And this is a good segue into the Brent Simmons response article. Did you read this yet? It's called "Why Developers Shouldn't Use iCloud Sync Even If It Worked."
I retweeted it.
Oh.
Yeah, I read it as well. And I was going to bring this up as well because, and forgive me for kind of interrupting your tangent, but one of the things that I find very interesting about iCloud is that Aaron and I share the same Apple Store ID, so we can share the same apps and so on and so forth. We have different iCloud IDs. And thus, if we had, say, a shared grocery list, we can't share a grocery list if we're using iCloud, or if that app is using iCloud in the background. And Brent talks a lot about this. iCloud is very personal and not very social. And I hate social because that's about as big a buzzword as brand. But nonetheless, I feel like there's some amount of truth to that. And Brent brings this up. And I presume, Marco, you're about to recap what some of the other things he said. But that
I quoted
rang
two
true
things. That's one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly true. And if I were to write, I've thought about writing a very, very simple shared list keeping app so that Aaron and I can share a grocery list or a packing list or a Home Depot or Lowe's list. But I can't use iCloud for that because we can't share it because we're on different iCloud IDs. And that's just terrible.
Do you use Google Docs for that?
No, actually, we use Wunderlist, which I'm not a tremendous fan of, but it does the job.
A lot of people I know use Google Docs for that, and we use Google Calendar to share our calendars. And,
we do use Google Calendar to share calendars.
One of the reasons we do that is because, I mean, I don't think it's been thought of at this kind of deep level, but the reality is that we never worry about Google Documents staying in sync. We never worry about Google Calendar staying in sync with like our various devices because we always know when we're making changes, we are directly manipulating the state of something on a server somewhere, and it's always in sync. You know, like it's never not in sync because it's not like we don't use any offline modes, right? The downside, of course, is that we can't actually make modifications to our calendar if we're offline. But thus far, that has not come up. You know, and I think
usually doesn't for most.
That scenario is going to be less and less likely. So, like that conceptual simplicity of how does document sharing with a Google document work? Live in real time, always synchronized. That's how it works. Can I you know, like, and you just don't think about it, and just like that model. It's very difficult to do well and bug free and fast and all that stuff. But conceptually, it's understandable to people, and they come to trust it. Whereas no one, not even the developers of the applications, can have any idea how things are working, even with zero bugs. And then, like the bugs. There's a couple of things I've read about iCloud core data stuff. Some of it unpublished as yet. Hopefully, it will be published at some point in the future somewhere. The worst part of any of these type of things is when you add on top of all the stuff we talked about, the type of bugs where there's nothing you can do to help your user. There's nothing like Apple can do to help your user. Just like things get wedged in a way that even a developer can't be expected to figure out on their own, let alone an individual user. And that's what they were talking about in the Verge article, is like a support time suck. Because sometimes things just get wedged and don't work, and there's no visibility of that. There's not even visibility to the developer unless like you can let the developer SSH into your machine and start digging through like, supposedly hidden directories containing big binary blobs and daemon processes that are hung that are not putting the binary blobs in the right place. And just like, it's the worst nightmare of trying to debug. At least when you're debugging server-side stuff, at least you have access to the server and you can see what's going on there. This is like the worst of all possible worlds. It's like every single person literally does have their own little server on their local machine, their own little data store on their machine, and you can't see any of that. And it's talking to Apple servers that you also can't see, all of which have bugs, none of which code you wrote, and you don't even have the source code for it. And good luck debugging that.
It's so true. So Marco, I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were going to bring up the social aspect, and you said you were going to bring up something else.
Yeah, I mean the other thing is that Brent says, keep in mind that iCloud is Apple only. He says you may think you'll never want an Android or browser-based version of your app, but are you sure? Really,
yeah, Marco,
really sure?
Are you sure? Sounds familiar.
Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure about Android, but no, I think this is a very good point that if you're in the iCloud platform business, if your app relies on that, then sure, that's fine if today you only have an iOS platform, but if you really invest heavily in that, you have to be really sure that you're only ever going to have an iOS platform. And I don't think that's a very safe assumption for a lot of things these days.
The best part was when he brought up, what about a Mac app that's not sold through the Mac App Store? Because you can't use iCloud there either.
Right, exactly.
We'd forgotten about. They always forget about. Remember when it was like, oh well, they're putting iCloud only in the Mac App Store. That'll be like, that's to lure you into the Mac App Store. Now it's more like another repulsor. It's the opposite effect. It's not like saying, well, I really don't want to be in the Mac App Store, but only the Mac App Store apps get to use this awesome new iCloud API. I guess it is kind of true for for key value storage or document storage, but. Yeah, like it's so incredibly. If you choose iCloud, not only are you just choosing Apple's platform, but you're choosing also their sales channels, like irrevocably.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, and obviously on iOS, if you're making an iOS app, you're always stuck in there, and that's fine. But I just think it's unwise to limit yourself unnecessarily. Like it's one thing to say I'm only going to have an iOS app right now. But it's a whole other thing to say I will never have anything but an iOS and Mac App Store app. Like that. Yeah, that's a very, very limiting thing.
And Apple can always change this because these are policy decisions. They could say, hey, guess what? We have a web API with a JavaScript library. Now you can use iCloud APIs from your web app that you write yourself.
Right. That would change
a
lot. I mean, if Apple ever opened it up to server-side or web-side interaction, that would open it up tremendously. But I don't think they ever will.
They don't know. They don't understand the web.
No, and
why would we ever do that? That makes no sense.
Right, like there's no immediately obvious benefit to them to do that, and so I don't think they will. I think that would be a big giveaway. They want to lock iCloud down to their devices and their stores, and part of it's just for control, and part of it so they can make sure that nobody goes crazy and abuses it, through the APIs and everything. But whatever the reason, I don't think that's ever going to happen. So I think it's and Brent also points out that for most apps needs. For syncing, it really isn't that hard to write your own server and to run your own server, and it really isn't that expensive, and it really isn't that complicated. And you can design server side stuff to make your life really easy in two key ways. You can make it really cheap to run and scale and low needs, and you can design the app so that if the server is not reachable, the app is still useful. And obviously depending on what you're doing with the server, how useful it can be will vary, but like with Instapaper, it was really easy for me to do this because Instapaper is made to be used offline. So if the server is not reachable, the app thinks it's offline. It still works. It works just fine. Like you just can't load new stuff into it, but it still works. Everything queues up, and once it gets a connection again, it works. So like if Instapaper's server goes down for an hour, which is a pretty major downtime for a web thing, I'll hear about it from a few people. But not nearly as many as you would think, because everyone else is still just using the app just fine.
Well, there is a big advantage to these type of, like, what Apple wants to happen with these services does happen a lot, where, like, I mean, it's easy for you to talk about it because you have server-side development experience, but what if you're just a client-side guy? Like, maybe you just want someone to take care of that other stuff for you. And, I mean, those type of APIs allow developers who would otherwise not be able to make these type of products to make them, or would otherwise need more people. You know, some examples might be, okay, so Lauren Brichter, genius programmer, great app designer, but he used Game Center. Why? Because he doesn't want to write that crap. And if it works, kind of, sort of didn't work when he launched his game. But, you know, like, if it eventually sort of works, he doesn't have to do matchmaking. He doesn't have to do accounts and stuff like that. He gets to just write the game part. You with Newsstand. I mean, that's mostly monetary things because you want to get the money and everything. It's not like you couldn't have done that. But, hey, you know, you can make an application that does subscriptions, that does something that a native application wouldn't do by using Apple's services, right? And then you went and did the web thing yourself anyway, because of course you can. But that's just an extension of the App Store model, where maybe you don't want to run a store. You don't want to figure out how to sell things to people and give them the downloads and host it and do all this stuff. We'll take over that for you. And Apple wants to take over all those things and provide these infrastructural services. And that's all great when the services actually work and are things that people want done. And I think iCloud is all of those things except for the working part, and maybe right up to the part where, like, if you were designing your own service to synchronize your stuff, you might design something like key value storage, and you might design something like iCloud's documents in the clouds, and you might design something like Game Center or whatever, because those are functions you can imagine doing. But would you undertake on your own to say, you know what, I'm going to provide arbitrary server-side synchronization of core data across multiple devices? I don't think an individual developer would bite that off. They would think of something simpler, like, you know, like the simple, what is that one? The Simple Node server-side API. Like, when third parties who created these services, they've looked more like traditional, more like modern web services, and less like what iCloud core data thing because they can't do that. They can't have little daemons running on everyone's machine synchronized. They can't make a daemon process on iOS that does all this stuff. Like, they would be forced to do something that is listening on HTTP endpoint that their applications talk to. You know what I mean? Like, they wouldn't be able to do all this crazy stuff that Apple did. And I think Apple just bit off more than it could chew in this case.
I mean, this is kind of a problem, as we discussed, I think 2 episodes ago, or last episode, about iCloud's model to the users, that it is this certain simplification of hiding the file system and doing these things, but it's so limited. I mean, this is kind of like, it sounds like Apple bit off more than they can chew with a lot of parts of iCloud, not just like, oh, it doesn't work reliably, but like, this was a bad idea.
Well, I don't know if it was a bad idea, but I just don't know if it's been executed well. And when you were talking a minute ago, I feel to some degree you're describing me, in that I have iOS experience and I have server-side experience. But the thing is, I have server-side experience in Microsoft technologies, which are expensive. And if I was to write, say, a grocery shopping list that I could share between multiple people, like Aaron and myself, what are my options? I can't use iCloud because that's tied to a single iCloud ID. So what am I going to do? I could do like Perl and be like John, or I could do PHP and be like Marco. I could do Python and be, terrible according to you two. I could do Ruby, which is Python. Also probably, well, you know what I mean.
I don't know Python, but if I was going to learn something else for the web backend stuff, I would learn Python.
You can email Marco. But the point I'm driving at is, what do I do? And interestingly, and I think Brent talked about this in a different post, maybe I would go to Azure. And maybe I would do, and that doesn't necessitate using C#, it doesn't necessitate using .NET, but from what I've gathered, having never played with this, Azure is a pretty decent way to get some sort of quick server-side or cloud database without too much effort with an iOS API. And that's just not a place. I don't think that's a position Apple wants themselves to be in. Maybe they don't care. I don't know. But that just doesn't seem right.
You might end up doing, and I've seen people do, like, this is the low-tech solution to, like, client-side people who don't want to write a big server-side service, but they know they need one, and they're like, oh, I just, like, for the grocery list. Like, look, it's not rocket science.
Don't tell me Dropbox. Don't tell me Dropbox.
Not Dropbox, but like something like, what if I just, like, shove a JSON file up onto S3 and have the thing pull it down and, like, reconcile it because it's just a grocery list. How many possible things could go wrong? Worst case scenario, I get the superset of a bunch of changes and there's some extra items that you don't want. I can deduplicate, like when you have a confined problem domain, you can get away with just the most ridiculous, simple possible solution. It's like S3 would be enough. All I need is something other, something not my device, something not that other device, but something in this third place that's always available. And I don't want to make it always available, and that's annoying. And that's really all I need is just a bucket that's shared, that's always available, and I'll do everything else myself in client-side code because it's a grocery list app. Like, that's what people end up doing. That's annoying. They would like to not be able to do that. If their needs are satisfied by key value storage, like, oh, well, everyone's got iCloud, and I know everyone's going to have an Apple ID, and I'm storing, like Mark was saying, like your last read position, and, like, it's really easy to reconcile.
And it's non-critical.
It's 2 bits of data. If I don't have it, I can throw it away, and it's, like, no big deal. Or, like, worst case, I can just pick the later one, assume that you read from top to bottom. Like, not having to do that and saying, I can just use iCloud key value storage, that just, like, makes people smile. Like, hey, wait, I don't have to do any of that crap. I just want to store a number somewhere, and iCloud key value storage can do that for me. And it's like plist, where when Mac OS 10 came out and they had these property lists, people were using them for everything because they're like, oh, well, I didn't need to design some stupid, like, I'm going to design a C struct and I'm going to serialize it with an NS encoder and it's going to... No, I just need, like, to store, like, lists of values. Like, I'll just use a plist. And, plist mania goes a little bit crazy, and then you end up, like, trying to make a plist into your entire database, and that's bad. But if you give developers a little tiny bit of cool infrastructure, that makes them happy. But if you keep ramping that up, you say, we're basically going to do everything for you, and don't worry, it'll work, and it doesn't, then, people scale back and say, you know what, maybe I should go back to uploading JSON files to S3, because that at least I can have some guarantees about it working in a predictable way.
Right, it's predictable, it's mostly reliable, and to some degree, it's a known quantity. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, and again, like, if you have simple needs, you can write your own sync stuff. And granted, not everyone's going to get their sync stuff correct, but again, like, if it's a grocery list and you have to sync stuff, like, what's the worst that can happen? It's not
and
that
if it's not correct, you can fix it because you have all the source code and you control both ends.
Exactly.
That's the worst part. Is like if it's going wrong and, like, the daemons running on your local Mac are wedged and are not synchronizing or notifying your application. It's like, you don't control that code. You're not making it run. You don't have the source. You can file bugs into the black hole and just wait patiently for the next major version. But in the meantime, your customers just want their stuff to sync.
Yeah, and as Brent pointed out too, this is such a good article, and it's so short, you should read it before we just quote the whole thing. But this stuff on doing the server side stuff has really gotten so easy in the last 5 years, as so many tools have come out to make it really easy, really cheap. You have to write so little custom code these days. There are great frameworks, there are great services, there are companies that will automatically scale up and down everything. There are, and granted, there's a lot of things that are more complex that will require custom work. But for the most part, for simple needs, for most app developers' needs, you don't need anything bigger than, like, a Linode instance, or paying by the cycle on something like Heroku or Azure or S3 or EC2 and the things that use EC2. Like, for most developers' needs, one virtual server somewhere will cover it. And you can write something in whatever framework you find that is understandable to you. And as Brent says, I think this is a very good point. I'm just going to read this whole article. As Brent says, like, if you can learn Cocoa, you can learn this stuff. Cocoa is so obtuse in so many ways. Like, web programming, to somebody who does iOS programming, web programming will seem easy by comparison.
Well, I just basically don't have to deal with pointers and types. But I would rephrase that. I would rephrase that part of his article to say it's not so much that it's so much easier than it was before, or at least rephrase your summary of it. It's that it used to be that for a given amount of effort, you could get a certain result. Now, if you put in that same amount of effort, your result will be so much better. Like, the base level has risen so much. It's still going to be complicated. There's lots of stuff to learn and stuff like that. But previously, if you put in, like, a week into getting your server-side stuff, you'd end up with, like, something that looks like someone who had been just doing server-side development for a week. But now you have such an incredible leg up with all of this infrastructure and these frameworks. If you put in the week, your end result will be you are standing on the shoulders of giants who've created all this infrastructure for you. You're not staring at a blinking cursor on a bare, Linux machine and saying, okay, now I guess I start writing a CGI script or something. Like, I mean, you have such a leg up. So it is really complicated, and that's I think why people stay away. I mean, it's like anything else. If you are a server-side developer, you take a lot of stuff for granted, but a lot of client-side people are starting from a base of knowledge that doesn't really help them that much. But if they can follow a tutorial to get some sort of Rails thing up, or even like Node, and just to get some sort of Node instance up, and put a little tiny snippet of code to like echo some string back, and you can run that instance on a virtual machine that you can scale up, you are so far ahead of where expert server-side developers were in 1993 with your stupid little one-line echo Node program, right? Like, the things that thing can do, the scalability, performance, and reliability of that are just worlds beyond expert-level knowledge from 2 decades ago. So that's
even
what I think,
1 decade ago.
That's where I think, like, that's what he's getting at. Is like, even though you don't know anything about this, you will be able to get something up that has good performance, scalability, and reliability, even if you have almost no idea what you're doing, if you just put in a little bit of time. And that was not true many, many years ago. And also remains not true if you were on to have 500 million users, which is why Apple's screwed. But you're not going to have 500 million users, and if you do, presumably you can hire some smart people to figure it out for you.
Like, Instapaper runs on about 10 servers because it does a lot of stuff for a lot of people. But the magazine runs on the cheapest VPS at Linode. It's $20 a month. The entire service runs on that. My blog, marker.org, it serves a good number of page hits these days. That runs on the cheapest VPS at Linode. Again, because it's like the stuff that we can get today is so advanced, and everything is so fast. Hardware is so cheap to rent, and bandwidth is so cheap. I've never bought bandwidth separately from any of these things. Like, with Instapaper, all the bandwidth is pooled from all the servers, and I've never exceeded that pool. Like, just whatever each server comes with, it's all pooled together, and I've never needed to buy more than that. And that's a pretty bandwidth-intensive app. Like, you can do so much now with so little money and so relatively few servers. And yeah, if you're using one of these crazy hosted things, you don't even have to deal with the individual servers directly. It's you can just do so much. And the fact is, most iPhone app developers aren't going to need to do some crazy, ridiculous, complex thing during the life of their app.
So you should finish quoting, but I assume, going by memory here, because I don't have the article in front of me, the very bottom part about how, or maybe this was in someone else's commentary, Apple's thing about how they want to own and control all the important parts of their business.
Yep.
Read that part.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I can't find that exact part, but he says, here he said, Tim Wood of the Omni Group tweeted the phrase "own the wheel." Here's the thing. This is Brent's words here. Here's the thing. Half the mobile revolution is about designing and building apps for smartphones and tablets. The other half is about writing the web services that power those apps. How comfortable are you with outsourcing half of your app to another company?
Yeah, it was Gruber's commentary that I was remembering. It was said, don't take Brent's word for it. Consider Tim Cook's doctrine.
That's
right.
We
believe that we need to own and control the primary technologies behind the products we make. I mean, it's just, if you want to make a great product, you want to have certain things under your control. Obviously, you don't control everything. You don't control the App Store. You don't control Cocoa. You don't even have the source code for that in most cases, unless it's like, something that's part of Darwin. Like, so many things are out of your control. And this is what's frustrating, I think, good developers with iCloud is they've accepted the things that are outside their control. The platform, the store, the language, the API, the compiler, lots of things are outside their control. But they always felt like I can wrangle the things that are within my control to make sure my customers have a good experience. And this iCloud thing is like they're between a rock and a hard place because the customers think they want it and are demanding it. They want the sync features, and they specifically ask for iCloud by name because it has good PR, and they can't make it work. And that's an uncomfortable situation to be in. Brent didn't have that problem with Glassboard because they controlled that side of it, and it was on them to make it work, and they could make it work because they controlled everything from top to bottom. They never were going to hit a barrier where they're like, this isn't behaving in a deterministic way, it's buggy, and I can't fix the bugs. Like, that was never going to be, it's a blocker, right? They never had those blockers. If it wasn't working right, they would tweak their server-side software. And if you really want to, control your destiny to the extent possible, like Brent's article said, why would you give up control over half of your application unless giving up control is one thing. The other thing is like not having to worry about those details. So Lauren gave up control of half of his application to Game Center. If that had not worked out for him, that would have been very bad.
And
because then
actually,
he
had a lot of problems with that.
I know, but eventually it sorted itself out. I mean, there was scaling problems because no one used Game Center before letterpress, and it's buggy and weird, right? But he didn't want to write that stuff himself because that's not what interested him.
I think he almost had to.
That's the trade-off he made there. Maybe he regrets it. Maybe he went the second time he would do the server-side part himself, right? But that uncomfortable situation where you're giving up control in exchange for, you hope, not having to do that. And if it comes out well, you're like, hey, look at all that work I saved. That was really smart. And, I got featured on the App Store because I'm using Game Center. And there's other fringe benefits to using, Apple's APIs, right? If it doesn't work out and you can't ship your application and you're rewriting it for the 9th time, then you're sad and you're like, oh, I'm never going to let that happen again. From now on, I'm writing everything from scratch like Lauren Brichter, who doesn't use UIKit.
So to wrap this up, what's going to happen in June or whenever WWDC is with regard specifically to iCloud? I mean, are they going to have a new API? Are they going to say, oh man, everything is finally fixed? And if so, is it going to be real or is it going to be a bunch of baloney? I mean, what do you guys think?
WWDC is all about the new file system, Casey. I don't know what
Yeah.
And don't forget the iWatch and the smart TV.
No.
John Syracuse will be so happy.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, I mean, do you guys think that they're going to make a big push for iCloud? Are they going to be repentant for it? Are they going to say, "Oh no, really for sure, I promise this time it's fixed"?
I don't know if they have enough time has elapsed for them to be able to, they know they need to do something. I don't know if enough time has passed for them to have actually done it. I don't know if they can come to WWDC and say, here is the thing, and we have a solution. Is the solution fixing it? Is the solution scrapping it and replacing it? Is the solution something in between? I don't think that enough time has passed for that to happen. All I think they can do when they show up there is hopefully engage the developers, acknowledge the issues, and have something for them that improves their lives in some way, while also acknowledging that, because I don't think they're going to come out, it's not like a File Vault 2 thing where we're going to say, File Vault 1, forget that existed. There's another thing. It's awesome. It works great. You will forget File Vault 1 ever existed. And people go, oh, wow, that is awesome. All right. And then they just forget. I don't think there's been enough time has passed for that because, I don't know, maybe I'm pessimistic, but what was in the Verge story? I think they said they had 4 people working on the iCloud stuff or whatever. Or some, Apple has smaller teams than anyone thinks they have, right?
Yeah.
And I know how much work a handful of developers can get done in a year's time, and I'm not optimistic by them coming down from the mountain with new stone tablets and saying we have solved your problems. Not because they don't want to or are negligent, but just because not enough time has passed.
I don't think that my theory that I said earlier about iCloud is that I think there's problems in both the API implementations and problems with just the user conceptual model of iCloud and of where your data is in your apps, how it's tied to the Apple ID that's signed into the device. I think there are such conceptual problems there that I'm not expecting iCloud as it is named today to ever be fixed. I'm expecting it to happen more like Mobile Me, which is some next generation thing will come out in a few years to replace or upgrade iCloud, and it will work differently for the users, not just the developers. I think it'll have to be conceptually different for the user.
But won't they keep the name though? I don't think they'll do the name change. That's what I was talking about. File Vault. I think they will, because it already is an umbrella term, and there are parts of iCloud that work okay. You don't have to scrap key value storage. You just don't. It's fine.
Right.
It's all under the umbrella of iCloud. So when you say that iCloud is conceptually there is no such thing as iCloud. iCloud core data stuff is conceptually bankrupt and needs to perhaps be replaced or modified. And iCloud's conception of, hey, when you sign out, we dump all your data that was linked to it, that whole connection between your Apple ID, your iCloud thing, and the data and applications, that can be revised. And all of that, I think, can happen over the course of several years without ever having to have a Mobile Me to iCloud type transition. I think they can keep the name because it is an umbrella term that really has no relation to, why is key value storage and documents in the cloud all under the umbrella of iCloud? No reason. They don't share the same servers. The backends might be written by entirely different teams, with entirely different code. The front-end APIs, also entirely different teams. They could be entirely different languages for all we knew. They're all Objective-C, but one could be Core Foundation. They're as unrelated as anything else, except for the fact that they're both network services, and marketing decided they're going to be under the umbrella of iCloud. So I think Apple has plenty of runway and room to totally change everything about iCloud while still calling it iCloud and just making it look like, oh, we're making it better.
Yeah, I think though, like they're gonna have to do something that's changing the way, the whole portion of iCloud that is app storage, like app storing their own data and having that sync somehow.
Well,
that I
they'll
think
fix that when they do multiple users in iOS. They'll do
right. Yeah, right. Like I just think that whole concept, as we talked about in another episode about the file storage thing not necessarily making a lot of sense or being too simple and not really addressing the problem domain well enough. I think the entire iCloud data model for apps has that problem. The entire iCloud data model is too simple, too limited, doesn't really address the real-life problems and usage well enough for a lot of apps. And I think we're not going to see that get fixed with the product that we currently know today as iCloud or the section of it. What we will probably instead see is people will start following Brent's instructions of we'll just see fewer and fewer apps relying on iCloud, especially from big developers who know better and have the resources to not use it.
I tend to agree, and I feel like, just like the both of you said, key value storage, I think that'll carry on. I think documents in iCloud will probably carry on. I feel like core data sync in iCloud will go the way of garbage collection. And no matter how you look at it, the forecast for iCloud, it's cloudy.
Oh my God, we have to end the show now.
I did that just for you guys.
We are not allowed to keep talking after that.
I knew that was terrible, but I
was going to make an
iSun
pun before, but I restrained myself.
See, that's because you're a professional.
Yeah.
All right, we should we'll end with this awesome song by Jonathan Mann.
How awesome was that? That was seriously fantastic.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental, accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental, accidental. Tech podcast so long.
Did you see his follow-up song? I like his second version even better.
He made a second version?
Yes, because
he said
it doesn't. I said the song he made was nice, but it didn't like thematically, whatever. It didn't seem right for the show. And he said, "Well, what would sound right for the show?" I said, "I don't know, bleeps and boops or something." And so he made one. He made one with bleeps and boops, which is also awesome.
Thus concludes another thrilling episode. The Accidental Tech Podcast is done for the day. But have no fear, 'cause they'll return again next week. They tried before, but they can't seem to stay away.
That's
You'll
awesome.
You'll have to send that around, because I did not see that. I had no idea.
Well, I will have to paste one of them in, and we'll give him a good link in the show notes. And
Yes.
Thanks to Jonathan Mann, the Song a Day guy on YouTube, for doing this. That's so awesome.
No, I lost my junk when I saw that, in the sense that I
What?
cannot believe that, in the good way, in that I can't believe that somebody on the internet would care enough about us idiots, particularly me, to include me/us in a song. That I was beside myself excited. That
Repeat
was
after
very
me,
cool.
Casey. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. And gosh darn it,
me.
people like me.
It's accidental, accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental, accidental. Tech podcast so long.
people aren't sick of us yet anyway. So, but eventually people will be sick of us. Then we'll have to do something.
It'll take at least 100 episodes. Don't you worry.
Nobody's going to be sick of us.
And no one isn't already sick of us. I always wonder if so Marco and I, we had our podcast, right? Are we getting the union of the people, or are we getting the intersection for the people who can tolerate me and can tolerate Marco? You know what I mean? Like, is the sum of our parts less than,
I think you guys are confused. Really, I'm the big draw, and you two are just riding on my coattails.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
Well, your job is to make all the people who hate both me and Marco have someone likable to latch onto on the show, because there are those people, and so once Casey starts getting haters of his own, then we'll have a problem.
It's only a matter of time. I mean, you can't do a podcast for that long and not get haters.
He's very likable.
That's true.
Yeah, like he's not obnoxious like we are. So,
are you sure? Have we met? Well, did you see somebody? Was it earlier today? Tweeted about how ugly we all are.
Yeah,
that was great.
What am I going to argue?